Hey everyone, welcome back. So we're continuing our discussion of continuous variables, and in this video I'd like to show you how to create a histogram in Tableau. So in the slides I've got an illustration of that, still using the Global Superstores dataset and working with the discount variable, but I actually wanted to play with a different data set in my demonstration. So if y'all want to try and recreate this discount histogram, you've got a picture of it there. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to connect to a different data set. So I've got a fresh Tableau workbook open, and I'm going to connect to a data set called Serial. This is one that I got from a Kaggle site. And Kaggle is the home for data science competitions, and they've got tons and tons of data sites you can play with. Now, when I first bring this data set in, when I first connect to it, notice that we've got those F1, F2, F3 variable names, just kind of the default variable name. And notice we've got a bunch of nulls here in our first couple of rows. That's an indication we need to run our data interpreter. So I'll go ahead and do that. And when I run the data interpreter, Tableau ignores a couple of empty rows up at the top, and then now is starting to give me some fairly reasonable variable names. I've loaded this data set out in Georgia View for you, and I've also given you this data dictionary. So you can kind of take a quick look through that and see what variables you've got and what they actually mean. And we may refer back to this as we work with this data set a little bit. But as we look at it, we have values for a bunch of different cereals that have different manufacturers. If we've got a type here, and I can go to the data dictionary, but I can also right-click the arrow and choose describe, and that will show me the values that I've got. So apparently I have hot cereal and cold cereal. We've got a bunch of numeric values. We've got calories per serving, grams of protein, of fat, milligrams of sodium, grams of fiber. A lot of those values here, and so we can see those numeric values, and we can also see, just double check, they're all coming in as numeric values. We've got sugar, potassium, vitamins, and minerals. Let's see, that's mouse over that percentage of FDA recommendations is how that vitamin mineral variable is expressed. Display shelf, let's actually bring back the data dictionary and see what that display shelf is. Here it is. It's either 1, 2, or 3 counting from the floor. So I guess 1 is the shelf closest to the floor, 2 is in the middle, 3 is on the top. So we've got that information. I would actually call that's probably a nominal ordinal variable as opposed to truly a numeric variable. So if I wanted to kind of be a little bit more careful with that, I might change that from a number maybe to a string. Right? Still have the values 1, 2, and 3, but it's not values I have any intention of doing math with. So now it would be treated as a dimension. All right, and then let's see, weight in ounces, number of cups, and a cereal rating. And again, our data dictionary, this is coming from Kaggle, so this is not the original creator of the data. It's a rating of the cereal. They're saying possibly from Consumer Reports, and just having played with this data set a little bit, I think it's a rating as to how healthy the cereal is. Not necessarily how good it is, but how healthy it is. All right, so that's the data that we're playing with. So let's go ahead and see how we've got all these great numeric variables to play with. Let's see about creating some histograms in here. So in order to create a histogram in Tableau, it's actually fairly straightforward, fairly simple process. Basically what you will do is you'll select the numeric variable that you want to work with. All right, so any of our dimensions down, or our measures down here would work. I'm actually going to take that display shelf and move it up into measures just so it's up there kind of where it belongs. And how about we choose calories per serving as the measure. So select your variable, then come over to show me, and you want to select the histogram. And that will get you your basic histogram set up. I'll go ahead and close show me so we don't have to look at that anymore. Get that out of our way. Get ourselves a little bit more room here. Just look at this, and so we get a basic histogram. So we see calories per serving across our cereals. The most common class is this one that looks like it runs from about 100 up to about 115 maybe. the axis values in Tableau are just spaced out equally. They're not necessarily tied directly to the bins or the classes. That's one thing that Tableau is a little bit different of. But it does show us if there are empty bins. Apparently there are no cereals in this kind of 50 to 65, 67-ish range. In terms of calories, looks like there's 3 of the cereals that are very low calorie, down here in the 35 to 50 per serving range. A whole bunch in here between like 90, 85, and maybe 115. And then as we get over that, tapering off. I would certainly not call this a normal data set. We have, I think, about 65 or so cereals in our data set. So I certainly would not call this a normal distribution. But it's relatively symmetric for what it is. If we had more cereals represented, then we would start to see some of that smooth out a little bit. All right, so that's our basic histogram. Now, you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, when a histogram is created, the value that we have on the rows shelf is the count of number of observations of the variable, which makes sense given what a histogram is. And then what you see up here on the columns shelf is a field called calories per servings bin. And this is a field that is actually created by Tableau. And you will find that field over in your dimensions. And so here it is, calories per servings bin. And what we can do is, if we like, we can edit that to change the way our histogram is set up. So I'm going to go ahead and select Edit here. And first of all, we could change the name of the field if we want. So we could call this, let's say, calories bin width, because that's really what it represents. And then you get a default value that, again, kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Here we're getting a bin width of 16.7, and that makes the spacing a little bit hard to interpret. So what I usually like to do is take it to something that is just easier to interpret. So I'll go to a bin width of 10. You can let Tableau suggest a size for you, but generally speaking, round numbers are awfully good because they're easy to interpret. So if we do that, if I take my bin width to 10, then I've got a bin that starts at 50 and goes up to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80. And so it's a lot easier to look at this and say, oh yeah, most of our cereals are between 110 and 120 calories per serving. The next most common bin, 100 to 110. A lot easier for us to interpret that than trying to say, all right, it's about 115-ish to 130-ish. If we can have those bins start and stop on even numbers. That's much more useful to us. And we can see here, we definitely have a little bit of tailing going off. We've got, like I say, that little bump of cereals down here in the low end. But, it's relatively symmetrically distributed, although I certainly wouldn't call it normal as I'm looking at this, but it is reasonably symmetric. That's one thing we can do, is we can directly affect that bin width. The other thing we can do with it that's kind of cool is we can actually set up a parameter for that bin width. So to do that, I'll go back to that dimension that Tableau created for me, go back into my edit screen, and if I click that down arrow, I can enter a value like I did, or I can go ahead and create a parameter for it. And so what my parameter will do is allow the user of this visualization to decide how wide they want those bins to be. So what we see here is that my current value is 10. I'm going to go ahead and just allow, actually I'm going to go ahead and, I'll just allow all possible values. I do this different ways. Just to play around with it. But I'm just going to allow all possible values for my parameter. Go ahead and select OK. And click OK to do it. I now have my parameter showing up down here in the parameters area. So I'll right click on it and hit show. And I'm just going to bring this and drop it over here to the left, just so I can kind of see what's going on with that parameter as well as with the whole chart here. And so what I can do here is I can come in here and I can start to play with different bin widths and see how that impacts what the histogram shows me. So if I make my bin width a little bit wider, then you can see I'm going to have fewer classes. And in this case, I wind up with now none of them are empty classes. So I've got a class that goes from 40 to 60, one from 60 to 80, and then going up from there. And again, we see that the 100 to 120 is definitely the most common one. So making my bin width wider gives me fewer classes that are going to contain more of the data, whereas making my bin width smaller gives me a more fine-grained display. Now notice that we do wind up with some gaps between our columns here. It's not because there's actually, it's not because we've changed and we just decided to show gaps in there. It's because now we've created bins, and a bunch of them, that don't have any values in them. And so you can kind of, look at the actual data and see, if we go in and look at the actual data, you can see our calories bin width is showing up there, but the actual calories per serving, notice they're all round numbers here, right? These are all 90 calories per serving. So there would be nothing, I've got a bunch that are 90 calories per serving here, then I've got an empty bin that goes from 95 up to 100, and if I go up to the 100 calories per serving bin width, then you can see I've got a bunch that are exactly 100. So these calories per serving are fairly discrete data, even though I'm treating it like a continuous variable. So we do have some gaps when we go to a bin width of 5. So maybe a bin width of 10 actually shows us something a little bit more meaningful. But by providing the parameter, what you can do is you can let your user, or you can play around with this and see what gives you the best look at your data, the best compromise between having a lot of classes that give you a lot of detail, or fewer classes that give you less detail, but kind of smooth out some of those possible irregularities with the data. All right, so that's how to create a histogram. I would suggest either in Global Superstores or with this data set, play around with it, look at different things, and kind of see what you can interpret from that, from the data that you're looking at. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here, and in the next one we're going to look at a different type of chart for continuous variables called a box and whisker plot. See you there.